everybody, welcome to the show today. We've got one of our favorite guests, Dr. Mike Larkin. Mike has been a fish researcher for, a long time, 20 plus years. He's helped us out on the podcast with lots of great information on different fish, and he's done a tremendous amount of research on bonefish. He's going to talk to us today about a new paper that he has that documents bonefish going from the Florida Keys to the Bahamas. Seems like that's a very easy thing to understand, but some of the scientists disputed it, said it wasn't possible. I don't know why it wouldn't be possible, but Mike is going to tell us all about that, and we're going to finish up with a bunch of information on knots. So stay tuned. Here we go.
I had a couple professors say, no, it's not true. They're lying to you. Anyway, I'm just got crucified because of it. I'm Mike Larkin, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
All right. Mike Larkin, you're back. What have you been up to, man?
I've been doing a bunch of these. They've been fun, but just working, waiting for the wind to die and get warmer.
No kidding.
I actually forced my kids to go out a couple of weeks ago, and it didn't work. It was cold. They were complaining. So winter's been tough. Trying to use year-round use of the boat, but the weather hasn't been supporting that.
Well, the entire state of Florida and most of the other states can understand exactly what you're saying. It is super, super cold everywhere right now.
Yeah. It's been windy and rainy, and it's just the first winter I have a boat, and now I only really go out on weekends.
Yeah,
my work schedule. So
when it's super windy and rainy and cold, is that good for the overall fishery? Does it have any effect on it from a scientist's point of view? I know from a fisherman's point of view what I would say, but from a scientist's point of view, I know that it can obviously get too cold and we can have fish die-offs and stuff like that. But do you think that the rough, windy weather and cooler conditions somehow benefit in a way that while we're sitting around watching football on TV instead of fishing, that we can say, well, at least it's getting better?
Well, from my perspective, looking at a lot of the data, recreational data specifically, when you have those calm days, you can actually see peaks in the landing. So I kind of feel like it's good. It gives the fish a break, right? I'm there's not a derby out there, people fishing and harvesting fish, and I'm like to think I'm one of those people harvesting fish when I can. So I'm not picking on anyone, but it is good. I feel like it gives them a break and lowers the mortality and lowers the harvest. Even though we'd like to be out there.
Well, that from a fisherman's perspective, that's what I would say too. Is it gives them a little break and gives the spots a break, and I don't know, just kind of stirs things up a little bit too.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've done the hot seat questions with you before, where we'll ask a whole bunch of different questions. But today, since we've done that a couple times with you, I want to ask you a couple of different questions. And I don't want to get into a real deep conversation about any of these, but just kind of curious, and it might give us something to talk about later too. All right, so we're going to go with 3 questions today to get us started. So number 1 is, what is one thing that you've learned in your research that surprised you? Like while you're studying all the fish over all these years, is there one thing that stands out, or one of a few things that stand out that really surprised you in your finding?
Well, one thing which we're going to go into today. Well, I guess the theory, the sum it up, like we think we know, but we don't really know until we study it. Like, and the thing we're going to go about today is the bonefish going from Florida to the Bahamas. That's just an example of, like, it really blew me away. You think of bonefish and, they tail, right? The water is so shallow that their tail sticks out of the water, right? And yet here's a fish moving over 100 miles over very, very deep water through a Gulf Stream, making those. So that, I guess that's you don't know until you study. Like, you think but then when you study, you find out. So that's just an example of, that's one thing I found out. So it forces you to keep an open mind, because just look at all angles, because if you make an assumption, well, you could be wrong. And I was wrong. I didn't believe it at first, but then we had multiple fish make that movement. We'll go into it later on in the podcast.
So just briefly, when you're thinking that you know what's going on, it's a shallow water fish that we typically see in shallow water most of the time. You were kind of making the assumption that, well, they probably spawn nearby in shallower water, not way out in the middle of the ocean, or maybe they don't. Some of the water that you might cross between the Florida Keys and Cuba, or the Florida Keys and the Bahamas, there's some incredibly deep water there. Like, so
Well, we
is
kind
that
of knew
the
from the data
assumption
that they were spawning in the reefs area, a little bit beyond the reefs, but I didn't think they were going beyond the reef to different countries, right? I mean, they don't like.
Okay,
So
well,
that really surprised me.
that's interesting for later. We're going to talk about that. So one other question is, what is one thing that you have changed your mind on in the last 10 years, which it might be the bonefish. It might be the bonefish, the same thing that you just talked about.
Yeah, but one thing changed my. I'm trying to think of a different example. Something I changed my mind on in the scientific field. Yeah, I'm flicking out, Tom. I can't really think of something I changed my mind. And I like to think I keep an open mind and look at different angles and different options. So, yeah, sorry, Tom. I can't really think of one thing I keep.
Okay. Well, your mind is set. You're
It might come back
rigid
to me
in your
later,
beliefs.
but-
No, I got you. Okay. And then the third that I thought was interesting, because you talk about your kids a lot, you're with your kids a lot. I wonder if there is a lesson that you learned through science and through your process of studying all these different fish over all these different years. If there is a lesson that you have applied to your kids or taught your kids a lesson that you learned while you're doing your research.
Yeah, we can definitely make a difference. So whether it's fishing mortality, whether it's the population, whether it's climate change, we can fix this. I know it's a big issue now, but I just feel like just keep an open mind, and we can reverse things. I've seen that, especially with fish populations where they have crashed, but they will come back. I mean, it may not happen overnight, but I just feel like keep an open mind. We can fix it. If we, what was that famous quote? Was John F. Kennedy said, "If man caused a problem, man can fix the problem." But I truly believe that if we can fix things. So don't think, oh, it's doom and gloom or oh, it's over. It can be fixed.
So
it may take time.
and you're relating that on a regular basis to your kids
Yeah.
About
Because I mean,
things.
they're the future, right? They're gonna have plenty of things to fix. Right. It's like we've screwed up a lot of things. So I need them to keep that in mind for their careers and their future and their whole generation, so they can fix things, and they will.
All right, cool. So as we move into the bonefish conversation, how do you want to start this? Tell us about the research that you were doing and lead us into what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. So recently, it's actually some data that was, some of it's pretty old, but recently published a paper, and the name of it is, I can give you a link to it, but Bonefish Do Not Respect International Borders. And it's really about the connection of bonefish going from Florida to the Bahamas. Now, years ago, 18 years ago, actually, Joe Gonzalez tagged a fish. Well, I guess let me take a step back. We had quite a big bonefish tagging project in the Florida Keys, where we had over 8,000 fish tagged, close to 400 recaptures. So we had a big, long bonefish tagging project. And then during this project, about 4 years in, Joe Gonzalez, unfortunately, the late Joe Gonzalez, he tagged a fish off Key Biscayne. And then about 4 months later, it was recaptured in the Bahamas. It was just funny. So the tags have this was the first one of the fish that made that movement from Florida to the Bahamas. It was actually Andros. So the tags have a phone number on it. It looks like a spaghetti tag. So it was funny because I did this guy, I'll never forget, name is Brian Harris from Sarasota, was a dermatologist, was over in Andros.
I know him. I used to fish with him.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, small fishing world. Okay. I've never met the man, but I talked to him a bunch on the phone, but I sat on it for like 3 days. I didn't tell my advisor. I didn't even tell my girlfriend, who's now my wife, but what is going on here? Like, is this true? Is somebody playing a joke on me? I guess I was closed-minded. This is something I guess, to your point before, somebody changed my mind on, but I kind of sat on it, and I kept calling Brian, asking questions, trying to get more detail about him. And I even get to the point, can I see your passport? The stamping, but I just wanted to know, I didn't.
So tell me this though, what you brought in Brian Harris, is he the one that caught the fish that Joe Gonzalez
Yes, I'm sorry.
tagged?
He was over there.
So Joe Gonzalez catches a fish with one of his clients
he puts the tag in the fish.
Key Largo or Biscayne Bay.
It was actually Key Biscayne.
Key Biscayne.
Yeah.
And then 4 months later, Brian Harris, a dermatologist, as I remember, he's from the Tampa area, kind of Sarasota, Tampa, Bradenton area.
Yeah.
I think.
Look him up still, but yeah.
He's a terrific fisherman. I used to fish him a bunch of times. Brian Harris, a dermatologist from, as I remember, the Tampa, Bradenton, Sarasota kind of area. He was in the Bahamas. He catches the same fish that Joe Gonzalez had tagged in Key Biscayne 4 months later.
Yep.
And
And everything matches up. The size matches up. The tag number obviously matches up.
Yeah.
He had the specific phone number.
Brian Harris is legit, man. I'm telling you that if that guy's telling you that he did this, he did it. There's no reason for him to falsify.
Yeah, that's
he
what
has
I
nothing
kept
to
thinking.
gain.
I'm like,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a very respected dermatologist, a very respected angler. He has nothing to gain. So that's really super cool. So that was the first time that you had seen a fish, 100% sure that fish traversed over to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's a little side note. So at University of Miami, every year as a grad student, I had to give a presentation to all the faculty at the faculty and the students. It's brutal because it's painful, but you have to give a presentation. And I presented that for my my annual presentation, and I got crucified. Like I had professors come right up to me and say that is BS. Like that is not true. Like
it couldn't happen. Like they're just saying there's no way that happened.
Now, certain ones are like Jerry L was very supportive of it. But I had a couple of professors say, no, it's not true. They're lying to you. And anyway, I'm just got crucified because of it. But, and these are professors, which should be open-minded, but anyway, that was, I sat on it, but then I released it, and I had criticism from, I presented at a symposium, like some people, which is, I mean, you never get 100% agreement on anything, right? We know that from politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay. I stuck with my guns, and as you pointed out, like Brian had nothing to gain from this, right? Like why would he lie to me? I didn't even know this man, then years go on, and then another one happened. So another one, Kenny Knutson tags one in Almirada. And I don't know if you ever sat down with Kenny Knutson. He would always say, like, I remember back in the day, I saw bonefish leaving the Florida Keys. They just left. He would always tell me that story. And
Hubba
then,
Hubba.
I remember. Yeah. He had the nickname of Hubba Hubba. But
so he told you the story about the fish leaving.
So he told a lot of people about his story. But anyone that spent some time with Kenny, and I love Kenny. He was a great guy. He is a great guy. So he always talked about like in the there was a day in the Keys where he saw like all these bonefish leaving the channel, one of the channels in the Keys, and they were leaving the Florida Keys, and he thinks they were all going to the Bahamas. And then years later, he goes to tag a bonefish, and then that one goes on to be recaptured also in Andros, the same location. This one, a guy by the name of Charlie Freeman recaptured it. So it was great. I got to pick on Kenny, like, hey, you're right. They did go to the Bahamas. At least that one did. That one that you tagged. And then so those are the two anchor tags. So think of like a spaghetti tagged bonefish that went from Florida to the Bahamas. And then there's another type of tag called acoustic telemetry. So to go through this real quick, think of like a little C cell no, not a C cell, it's too big. Like a double A or even a triple A size battery. That's what they look like, that you put inside the fish. And this tag gives off a ping, and every tag has a distinct ping. So okay, this is tag number 1. This is tag number 2. So okay, I put tag number 1 in a 23-inch fork length bonefish at this location, and then when it goes on to be recaptured. Sorry, I think my computer had a little thing pop up there. But anyway, So there was a acoustic telemetry. I did one years ago. Then the Bonefish Tarpon Trust did a much more detailed acoustic telemetry project in the Keys. So they were looking at spawning, looking at their movements. So now one of those fish that they put a telemetry tag in got recaptured over in the Bahamas as well. So this is different. So with these tags, they're giving off a ping, and then you have to put a receiver in the water. We call them listening stations. To think of like a little tube in the water that listens for them. And it depends how the distance that it hears the fish depends on the depth of water, depends on the bottom type and all that stuff. But anyway, you have to have a listening device in the water to hear the tag. The great thing is, they're listening constantly, 24 hours a day. So there was a sawfish project in the Bahamas. So here's a fish tagged in the Florida Keys with this acoustic telemetry, this pinging tag, and then it's detected over in the Bahamas. So and the with the bad news, so we got a whole bunch of fish tagged in the Florida Keys, and now there was an acoustic telemetry project going on in the Bahamas in Andros. The bad news is there was a lot of drama with the Bahamas. They really stopped research in the Bahamas. You might not have heard about this here from in the fishing industry, Tom. But anyway, there was like a cutoff where the Bahamas like, hey, no more research, not now. We're not giving any more permits, no research, no nothing. And it was like a 2 or 3 year gap. So that project had to end. Well, there was some drama. I don't know the details as much as I should, but I think they just felt like maybe the Bahamas folks were being taken advantage of, or the scientists were communicating as effectively to the Bahamas people doing the permit. It seemed overkill, but anyway, so there was only like 7 months. The reason I'm going into this, there was a 7-month window where acoustic telemetry tagged fish were in the Florida Keys swimming around, and there were listing devices in the Florida Keys, and there were listing devices in the Bahamas. And then that project ended. Well, even now it hasn't picked up yet now. So that's a whole nother drama with there. I think now the Bahamas is slowly letting research come back to the Bahamas, but they said, we're not getting any more permits, no more research. But anyway, there was only a 7-month window, which is a bummer because I think as the project, as more fish were being tagged in the Florida Keys, I like to think there would have been more recaptures, other fish that moved over from Florida to the Bahamas. But anyway, but if you don't have a listing station in the water, you're not going to get any data. You're not going to hear. Like you have to have you have to have an ear there, right? So that's there's pros and cons to every tag movement. So we have 3 right now. So 2 acoustic, 2 spaghetti tags, and then that acoustic telemetry. But I want to go into some of the interesting coincidence. Well, they're probably not coincidences, but some of the data we got back from this. So first of all, we've had bonefish go from Biscayne Bay all the way down to Key West. So that distance, making it over 100 miles. Well, first of all, you think, well, maybe that's an outlier. And outliers, you cut out outlier. You don't include them with the other data. But if you look at it, actually, those were not outliers. Those fish that went from Florida to the Bahamas, to Andros, it was over 100 miles. But we've seen that distance in Florida. So it follows the same distribution. Outliers usually like, here's a point here, and here's a point way, way, way over here. So it matches up with the distribution that we've seen in Florida. We've certainly seen fish make.
You would know that the ones that went from Key Largo to Key West, that's an acoustic tag or a spaghetti tag,
those
or both?
Were spaghetti tags, or both. Actually, now they're seeing it more with the acoustic telemetry, because now there's it's. So I guess I'm going to give away my age, but when I did it, it was like, okay, I had acoustic telemetry, I had receivers around Biscayne Bay, but now there's so many different projects going on. It's really exciting.
That's what I was going to ask, because I know that in a previous podcast we had talked about this with another scientist, I think the FIU people, and they were talking about Jack Crevel's, and they were saying that once you put an acoustic tag in a fish, that any other study that has acoustic listening stations will upload the data, and you might get a notification that your fish was found. And I guess that's what you were referencing with the sawfish program. That's how that was picked up. So you wouldn't even, like, the question would obviously be, well, if you don't have a listening station in the Bahamas because no one thought that they went there, then how would you ever know? But it's because there are studies going on for other fish that picked up the acoustic ping that we would know for sure. All right, Joe, just to clarify that for everybody.
And then another thing that was interesting, to go on a side note, one of those Florida Keys tagged bonefish got detected by one of those devices in Tampa. So only one so far. But so it really is. It's a brave new world. It's really exciting because there's so many other listening stations around. They're all around the Gulf. There's people doing lobster, doing Goliath grouper.
And then as a scientist, tell us how you would find out that one of your fish that you're studying, or one of a fish that you tagged, would show up somewhere else. Like, how does that data get uploaded? And is there, you just get an email notification, like you get an email, or like, what would that be like?
Yeah, now there's a website that goes through, and you can upload it, and you'll be contacted when there. It's someone that actually organizes and communicates with everyone in one central place. Like, hey, you look at your data, like, oh, I got tagged 52, and it'll go to this website, and then it'll connect that 52 is John Smith at this university. So back in the day, it was funny when I was doing it. It was just I had receivers in Biscayne Bay, Biscayne National Park, and there was also a nurse shark one going down in Tortugas. And sure enough, I had a tag that was like 532. I'm like, I don't have a bonefish tag 532. Turns out it was a nurse shark that was tagged in a dry Tortugas that swam up into Biscayne National Park. So back in the old day, you go back and you contact the tag manufacturer, say, hey, can you tell me who tag number 532 is? And they'll go back to their database and, oh, that's Wes Pratt from Marine Lab. And I reached out to him and all that. But now it's much more organized. They have a website. You can upload your data and communication, and everyone communicates, hey, I got this tag. They upload it. So it's really fascinating because people working on lobster, working on fish, and they're all using the same type of equipment, very similar tags. So they're being detected. So it's much more exciting now.
Okay.
And that's how that Sawfish project picked up that bonefish over there. So
that's cool.
But to go through, so you get these answers, you get a lot more questions and answers. So we had 3 bonefish that went over there. So the first question, like, were they alone? I don't think so. Like, if I'm a bonefish across the Gulf Stream, I sure as hell I'm not doing it alone, right? And we know they're schooling fish, right? They join other schools, so I don't think they're doing it alone. And we think of them as most of the time a bottom dwelling fish. But I don't think they're on the bottom. If you look at the cross section of the Straits of Florida there, below about 200 meters, it gets really, really cold. So, and then bonefish have a threshold of about 15 degrees Celsius. So they're not on the bottom. They're not. They would freeze to death. They're not following the bottom. So they're up in the water column somewhere. I'm really confident of that because there's no way they're going on the bottom of the Gulf Stream. It's too cold. So they're up there, and I always joke. I had a joke years ago. Like I used to hear people, "Well, bonefish are great marlin baits." Well, maybe marlin eat them. Maybe they're eating them. And then Glenda Kelly told me a story. I never was able to verify it, but there was a wahoo someone caught in the Gulf Stream, and in its belly was a bonefish. So like a cut in half bonefish. Like I always wish this is before cell phones, and now everyone has a camera in their pocket, right? But anyway, so yeah, it was a big wahoo and had a bonefish in its belly. It was a story I got from Glenda Kelly from IGFA. But anyway, so yeah, they're probably schooling over there. They're not going in the bottom. And then another question is, why Andros? Like Bimini is closer.
Yeah.
Right. So I think Bimini's can be 50 to 90 miles from where you are in the Keys. Andros is even further away. Like what? Maybe.
What are the listening capabilities in Bimini?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. So you're right.
So maybe that's what it is, right?
Yeah, you're right. But also there's there's guides over there. At least the tagged bonefish, whatever the anchor tagged fish, were never recaptured in Bimini. But you're right. But
listen, man. If the whole government is saying we don't want any more research over here, and you get a guide that catches a fish, he might just cut that thing off or be like, I don't know what that is, or just let it go, or not know what to do with it, or not care, or feel like if he reports it, then that's somehow going to be bad for the Bahamas, because that seems to be what if they outlaw for whatever their own reasons were, they outlaw research because they feel like it's not in the Bahamas' best interest for whatever reason. Who knows why? But, that would be echoed through the guides too, I think, because they listen to the guides. The government listens to the guides in the Bahamas, and they make suggestions, and then they, like that whole thing with the fishing license that you were supposed to have. That was, I don't know.
But to go through Dummy Reptile, but this was back before this happened. So this was when in the 2000s when we had all those fish swimming through the Florida Keys with those the anchor tag, spaghetti tag. Then there was a lot of research. Bahamas certainly open, so this was certainly the case. Now currently, and I wouldn't say they're outlawing research, but they stopped research. But they're slowly. I hear stories of them trickling back in. But a lot of goes in the spaghetti tag, right? So one, you have to tag the fish. The person has to report, hey, I tagged this so-and-so fish, which I think we had great people that did that in the Florida Keys. But two, the fish has to, there's other factors, right? The fish has to be recaptured. So someone in the Bahamas has to recapture it. And then the other factor is they have to report it, right? So here's a 1-800 number, but here, what if somebody's on an out island in the Bahamas on a sailboat, they catch a tag fish and, I forgot to write down the tag number. So there's the recapture rate. there's a reporting rate, right? They have to report it, and there's also a tag shed rate. So I put when I was working on that study at the Miami Sea Aquarium, I caught bonefish and tagged them. And after about a year and a half, the fish lose the tag. And it's not the tag. So I also put tags in concrete and put a screen around them. The tags are fine. And I actually saw some bonefish at the Miami Sea Aquarium. They would rub it off. They would actually go against the side and rub the thing off. So another thing, the tag has to stay on the fish, right? So and they suddenly, so after about a year and a half, like 99% of the tags are gone. Unfortunately, they just rub it off, or it comes off with algae or whatever. So, but yeah, the interesting is interesting. Like, why were they recaptured there? Another thing, of those 3 fish, the 2 spaghetti tag and the 1 acoustic telemetry, they were tagged like over 90 miles from each other in Florida. But then they were recaptured within about 25 miles of each other. So it's like you have this big area over here where they're tagged in different areas, but then they were captured in a smaller space. So I don't think that's a coincidence. Why Andros, and why in this like middle Andros Bight area are they being are all 3 of those fish being recaptured? I don't know the answer why.
Have you fished Andros?
No, I always want to go there. I was very lucky to fish.
I've been there to that middle Bight, right where you're talking about. There are a lot of bonefish there. Like that's where they want to go, right? It's like for people, like why is all of a sudden there's this collection of a ton of people in February at this one little place? Well, it's the Super Bowl, right? Like that's where the people go for whatever reason. And that it seems like, I mean, when knowing the guides over there, Andy Smith and some of the other guides over in Andros, I mean, Middle Bight, that's the spot.
And the other thing is like what caused them to move over there? Is it spawning? Is there food habitat? There is certainly some documented spawning events with bonefish over in Andros. During those times between the fish were tagged and recaptured, there were some hurricanes that went by, some storms. And you think of hurricanes, going from east to west, but not always the case. Like Wilma was one of the ones that occurred between when Joe Gonzalez tagged the fish and when it was recaptured by Brian Harris. And Wilma went west to east.
Right.
So, I mean, it actually pushed right through. I'm not saying that's the reason, but
then you have a ton of storms that come in from the west or from the east. They hit Cuba and then turn almost due north and come straight
that can push them there too, right? Yeah. So I got all these reasons. Are they going over for spawning, or did a hurricane storm push them over there? I don't know the answer to these, but these are all things that we were considering in discussing in the paper. Another thing, there's a lot of geologists at University of Miami always talk about Andros has these. It's kind of hard to describe these whitings, like these big mudding events during the wintertime off the west side of Andros. So they were saying like maybe it's they go over there for these mudding events where the wind will stir up these mud areas. I've never physically seen it, but the geologists say there's something real special about the geology of the west side of Andros. And we know bonefish, live in mud, right? Or they take advantage of mud and not shy of being in mud situations. But is it spawning but it also opens the question as like how does a bonefish, they don't have GPS trackers like we do, right? Like how does a bonefish that's in let's say Joe's, for example, it's in Key West. I'm sorry, Key Biscayne. How does it know how to cross the Gulf Stream? How does it know to get to Andros? And I've looked in the literature, and there's all different examples of fish using landmarks for navigation, using the stars, celestial cues for navigation, using the currents, using magnetic fields. Hammerhead sharks are a big example of that. They can detect a magnetic field and use it for navigation. Is it the smells? There are certain smells. Or sound? Is there salinity? I don't think it's one thing. I personally think it's multiple things. Maybe it's that current. They know they have to go, counter to the current of the Gulf Stream. Maybe it's
we've asked these questions, and it's very common for salmon to go to the same place where they were born, right? Like that's now common knowledge. But when it comes to something like a bonefish, that I can't believe they go 100 miles away. I mean, maybe they go 1,000 miles away. Who knows?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
we know that other fish have this capability, and then when it comes to tarpon, we know that tarpon migrate because they're easy to see. You can track their movements really easily through fishing guides and other people that are saying, well, there's tons here now, and then next week there aren't many there. But if you go up or down the coast, that's where they are. So we know that about so many fish. I don't know why it would be any kind of surprise that a bonefish would have the same capabilities.
Yeah, yeah, try to keep an open mind, right? We know they were recaptured in Andros, but maybe that's a function of fishing effort, right? Maybe there's higher fishing effort there.
What about Mexico? Like, if they can go to Andros, they could go right over to the Yucatan. Is there any evidence of that happening?
I have not seen that, but I've been proven wrong before, And another thing, so when this first recapture happened, this Joe Gonzalez, Brian Harris recapture, I gave a presentation at a scientific conference and published a paper on it, and it really kind of to get buzzing going, and a lot more tagging occurred. So in Hawaii, they started tagging bonefish in Hawaii, same tags and everything. And in Hawaii, they bonefish. Now it's a different species. It's Albiola, I think, vergata, as we have primarily Albiola vulpes in the Keys. But anyway, different species of bonefish, but still an albiola. But anyway, they had bonefish in Hawaii go between the islands as well. So it's just further evidence that bonefish can make these long distance movements over deep water.
Very cool.
But yeah, I'm keeping an open mind. Maybe they go to all over the Bahamas. Just kind of keep it open. Maybe they go to Mexico. Maybe. But
it's kind of disappointing, actually, to hear you say that the scientists were closed-minded about this. Like, no, that can't happen. That guy's lying to you or whatever. It seems like a scientist, the scientific method would be, I'll make a judgment with what the data tells me.
Data has,
right?
Yeah.
I might go in with I think that would be like what a scientist is supposed to do, is like, you don't have any sort of bias. And if you do, then you have to put that aside and just say, wow, you got a recapture over there? Are we sure that's the case? I don't know. I mean, does that surprise you? But you see it everywhere. Like, even in the Egyptian pyramids, like there's some information coming out now that maybe we have the timeline that we have on the pyramids might not be correct. And boy, you'll have some people that are just like, no way. Right, like that is not possible. But
yeah, and I gotta admit, it was a small number, but I did have two professors at University of Miami come up to me and just say, "That's BS." They just straight up, they thought I was like lying or something. Like, anyway, but you're right. Just scientifically, you got to keep it open and what the data. And I'm still trying to keep it open, right? Like what if they go like this was one way, right? Florida to the Bahamas. What if they go the other way, right? Why can't they go from Bahamas to Florida? I'm still going to keep that open. Like, we would have to tag a bunch of fish over there and see if they come over, but just keep an open mind. Anything's possible, you know?
Well, I mean, I thought that some of the fishermen do have an open mind in some of those cases. And it's like, why aren't there bonefish in Key West? Back when I started guiding in Key West, there were very few bonefish there. And even back then, people were like, man, I don't know, maybe they go to Mexico or Cuba or something, and they get netted down there, or who knows, man. But they used to be here, and then all of a sudden there weren't any. And then now the bone fishing in Key West is fabulous. It's amazing. It's the best place in all of the Keys to go bone fishing is now Key West. So how does that happen? Like, there's just this resurgence of a fishery that once basically didn't really exist, and then it existed before that. Like, there's ebbs and flows of everything, but I thought that at least the fishermen were being open-minded enough to go, well, if they were here and then all of a sudden they're not, then somebody probably caught them somewhere, like all of them in a big net. Maybe they're after a different species and they catch them all. Like, it seems like if you have a schooling fish like a redfish or a mullet or a bonefish, and you're out there purse seining, and you happen to get in the right place where this unfortunate giant school of fish is, seems like they're going to get every one of them, right?
Yeah, they could. Yeah. But to take a step back, I feel like we're constantly learning. When we first started putting tags in bonefish, the belief was, it was say, Amarada and just in Florida, Amarada and Biscayne National Park. Even then, we had the first, within a year, we had a fish that went from Biscayne Bay down to Amarada. And that one, that one received a lot of criticism, like, oh, no, either somebody's lying or somebody brought that down. But then we started getting getting probably 100 fish that did that, right? So it is like eventually it can't always be one person driving it down, multiple people. And we have fish going back and forth. We have fish going from Amarada up to Biscayne Bay. Right. So you look at the mixing rate. So eventually that calmed down. But, I guess when you bring something new, the first response is, no, that's crap, but eventually as you get more data, you can you can criticize me, but this is what I got. I have no reason to not include it, no reason to look at it. And it also makes me wonder, I did in my dissertation, just because I want to go in with my committee, I said, okay, look, a small number of bonefish go from Florida to Bahamas. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But in reality, I don't know. I don't know if it's less than 5% that make that movement, or maybe it's 50%. I really don't know. So sorry, I'm
interesting.
Quick on my phone, but
so what does that really mean to us, or do you have more information on this study?
I think if that's the case, I think we should, for management, we should manage them the same. Like we should, it shows that maybe you have one unit stock, meaning or unit stock is a scientific term, but maybe one population, right? Like maybe we always think, and I'm guilty of this, okay, a Florida Keys population and a Bahamas population. But now we have data that's showing mixing, so maybe I think, do a joint management plan, similar size limit, similar bag limit, or similar regulations. They should be mandated as one unit. Like they do a lot of that with tuna, because tuna don't respect their national borders either.
Yeah, I would think though that it's like that the amount of bonefish that people are keeping through fishing is not the problem in this situation. I would think that the problem is commercial fishing that in a method that is so effective, like a purse seine, that it's not if you're going to hook and line bonefish out in the middle of the ocean, I mean, how many are you going to catch? Okay, that's not going to be detrimental to the population. Like if you were to see a giant school of fish from a spotter airplane and surround it with a net and you get every single one of them, which is a very common fishing method for certain fish. Seems like bonefish would show up equally as well if they were in the top part of the water column. Not that anyone is targeting those necessarily, but you can make cat food out of any fish, right? That would seem like the most detrimental to a spawning population of okay, if we found out that they were spawning in a certain area, would there be a way to maybe regulate a certain type of commercial fishing during that time? And those people that are commercially fishing, maybe they're purse seining for something else. That's just bycatch, which maybe it's valuable to them at some point, but it's not like all of a sudden you see bonefish showing up on menus everywhere in the world because they came across a spawning population of fish. But that seems more like what I would think is for the overall population of the fish, if you could protect them against some sort of a fishing technique like that, which I don't know if it's possible.
I'm going to pick on you, Tom, to keep an open mind. There's a classic example of snook in Florida where, they closed commercial harvest, but the population was still declining because of just guys like you and me. The recreational fishery can certainly have a significant impact.
Oh, I believe it can. Yes, for sure.
If you have a million people, okay, they kill one fish a year, that's a million dead fish, right? So it's so it could be, I'm saying both, but, the recreational fishing, from what I've seen from my experience, and I criticize myself. I like to consider myself a recreational angler, but I am making a difference. I'm certainly killing fish, even accidentally, like catching early. There is release mortality, right?
Yeah.
If you have enough people doing it, you can certainly put a dent in the population from that.
Yeah, and I believe that for sure. So what, other than managing the population as a whole, would there be any possibility or how would someone that thought, Well, if they can go to the Bahamas, then could they go to Mexico or could they go to Cuba? Is there any way that I could put listening devices over there or find out if there are listening devices, or like, is there any way that somebody does that, or do you have to get all new funding for a whole new study? Or maybe there are already listening devices over there and they're not picking up any fish. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I'm not aware of any listening devices currently in Cuba, like for example, like Cuba, but I could be wrong. I could just be just not up to speed on that. So but yeah, I mean, I feel like the future looks so bright with more and more projects going on, and I know there certainly are some in Puerto Rico,
Mm-hmm.
So
we've never picked up a fish that went from the United States to Puerto Rico.
not yet.
What about tarpon? What about tarpon?
Well, there was a satellite. See, tarpon, you have the big advantage of you can do telemetry tagging, and they have done that, and so a lot of movements in Florida. But you also do satellite tagging. But there was to go back to the spaghetti tag. There was a long-term spaghetti tag project in tarpon, and there was a fish that went from like North Carolina to Cuba. So there was a tarpon that made that movement.
Wow.
So there was only one, but But
I
again,
recovered one spaghetti tag in a tarpon, and I never got
really?
any. Yeah,
Okay.
and I never got any information on it. I still have pictures of that tag, but I never got any information on it.
Yeah, I
Because
didn't know.
that it had numbers on it, but it didn't have a phone number. It didn't have and this is before the internet or whatever. But I didn't have any way of knowing who I should call. Right,
Yeah,
and the tag looked really old, and it had a lot of marine growth on it. We got the marine growth off of it, took pictures of it, and I didn't ever know what to do with it. Like there was no phone number. There's nothing to call. There's no way to. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, that goes back to the reporting rate, right? Like the recapture rate is one, but the reporting rate. You have to know nowadays.
I didn't know who to report it to. I would have been happy to report it, but there's nothing, no information on that. Now you probably scan a QR code on the thing and report it. Back in those days when I caught that fish with that tag, I also occasionally, more than once, would find these little glass vials all over the place, and they were obviously scientific research going on. Someone, I think maybe you might have told me before,
were
that
they
could have
floating
been
at the surface?
Yes, they were floating at the surface, and we were, and it was in kind of tarpon season, so we would be out there kind of staked out, and we see these things floating by. I'm like, what are those things? Like, did a cruise ship like drop them, or did a container open up with these little? It almost looked like a little, a timer with sand in it, where you turn it over and the sand drips down, but a little one, like it was about 3 inches long, and it was a glass vial with just like a little piece of paper in it. And I didn't know what to do with those either. We recovered some of them.
There wasn't like a phone number. I heard about that project years ago. There was a student that worked on that.
Someone told me that was a project that measured the current. Like they put those in Florida Bay, and they did some sort of study like this I heard about, where they dispersed those all through Florida Bay, and then they were counting where it all came out, and it looked like Long Key Bridge was like the funnel, where most of those from all of Florida Bay, the water flowed out Long Key Bridge more so than 7 Mile Bridge. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see that study and see if that's actually true, because that's total bro science right there. That I just heard that from another fishing guide who probably fishes at Long Key Bridge. And he's like, that's why the fishing's so good here, because more current comes through here than any other place. It's a good story. I don't know if it's true. But anyway.
But I read a paper once that it might have been the same study where they actually dumped a bunch in the dry tortugas to look at, okay, if you have spawning, the focus was if you have spawning in the dry tortugas, where would the larvae go to?
Yeah.
But but nowadays we have much more information, because it's like you're assuming that larvae is just a floating blob, right?
Right.
Whereas nowadays it's great. There's much more. The people are incorporating movement dynamics into the fish, like meaning the larvae can swim, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was like back in the 70s and 80s. They did that. Maybe in the 90s. That's interesting that you saw that. But now we know much more.
Maybe those little vials would have come from dry tortugas, because we were in Key West. We were right on the west of Key West. They could have come from there.
What year was that? Do you remember?
That would have probably been like early 2000s, like sometime in there.
In fact, some of the people, I guess I'm biased because I saw the people do it. You remind me, but they'll actually take larvae. They'll put them in a big like glass. They'll put them on the Gulf Stream, and they'll put them in a big glass tube to protect them from some fish eating them. Put a camera on top to look at look at that swimming dynamic. Like
really.
But back in the day, we didn't know that. Back in the day, it was just a bottle floating, like a message in a bottle.
Well, would it be like would the movement of something on the surface be the same as if something was 50 feet, 100 feet below the surface, or even deeper? Like, I don't know. Like, you have wind and all kinds of factors.
I would think no. I think there's so much more of these movements, especially, I guess I'm my bias, but bonefish and tarpon larvae are excellent swimmers. So they're moving up and down. They're moving left, right. So some of the fish, I think it would be, it's just essentially they for swimming ability, they are floating. But some of the other fish, I think it'd be drastically different because of their swimming ability.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Well, you got other information in there? You want to move on to knots?
Yeah, I guess move on to knots. That's my summary.
Okay. Well, that's really cool, man. I appreciate you bringing that on. It's interesting. Fun fact: the first story that you told about Brian Harris, Joe Gonzalez, and yourself, all three podcast alumni.
Oh, so Brian Harris was on here too.
Sorry, Brian Harris was not a podcast alumni.
Okay.
But I fished with him. So interesting.
Okay,
I had Joe
Small
on.
fishing world. Yeah.
Joe Gonzalez, man. What a legend. R.I.P. R.I.P. to him for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So what about knots? You been tying knots or what?
I always look at, your podcast coming out with different knots, and I know you have, I've seen on Waypoint, you have like knot videos.
Yes.
So I want to pick your brain. Let me ask you, has your mind changed? As you asked me earlier, are there certain knots you use now? Like now that you know the data, like, I'll never use that knot again. Or have you completely changed the knots that you use?
Yes. So it's very interesting that you asked this because we're right in the middle of putting this thing together to where it's one thing to learn how to tie all the knots. It's another thing to say that that's a good knot. And it's a third thing to test the knot and actually come up with a percentage breaking strength. And then it's an even different thing to put all this into a table to where you can clearly see that, like, you have your knots that are designed for braid to fluorocarbon, say. Okay, so this one, test number 1, this one number 2, this one number 3, and you go to your knot and you're like I like the Aussie Quickie, and how did that do? And wow, that's not anywhere nearly as strong as this other one up here. But what I've learned is that those tests have shown me which one is the strongest consistently. But then there are also other factors that you have to, like, a lot of people will ask me, like, why do you have to know so many knots? Well, first of all, the double uni knot will handle most fishing situations, and it is one of the strongest knots that you can tie. It actually won over the FG knot in our little tournament, but most of the time when I tie the FG knot and the double uni knot, the FG knot will win by a pretty good margin. Like that knot, the FG, is one of the knots that tests over 100% most of the time, which means that if you have 40-pound fluorocarbon and you have 20-pound braid and you're going to try to attach these together, it should break more than the 20-pound stated strength of the braid, right? And most knots, if you're tying 20-pound to anything else, you'll get it to where it breaks at 18 pounds or 17 pounds or sometimes 12 pounds. That's a bad knot if it tests at 12 pounds, obviously, because that's almost 50%, right? But then you can have these other ones that test at like 104%, and it broke, but it broke in the braid. The knot didn't break. Like, it broke in the line. And you test it 3 or 4 times, it breaks in the line every single time. That's a knot that tells me this knot is stronger than the line. Like, the connection between this and the fluorocarbon leader is stronger than the line itself, because it will break in the line every single time. So that's a 100% knot or an over 100% knot. There are only a few of those. I've seen the double uni knot do it on occasion. The FG knot does it almost every time. It will test over that. But then this is why you would need to know multiple knots, because the FG knot is a great knot for you to tie at your tying bench where you have good light. You can sit there and tie it. Now, obviously, if you're a mate and this is the knot that you like and you're tying it 30 times a day, every day in every condition, you're going to get really good at it. But for the rest of the people out there, a double uni is going to be way easier to tie out on the water than an FG knot.
So I feel like the double uni, like, what about Albright in that mix?
An Albright is a very strong knot, and it will. Man, I don't have the Ben. Do you have the sheet up? Could you pull it up? Maybe we can put it. Maybe we can. We can. Ben has this sheet that we're working on, and we're going to make a downloadable guide where it'll be a free download just to help people. And the way that this is really going to help is, like, it's one thing to go to the YouTube and see me tie one and then see somebody else tie one and then see somebody else tie one and then say, well, I think I kind of like that one. But what this guide that we're putting together will do, it'll show you every knot that we've tied and how it tested in comparison to the other knots, and then links to each video. Right. So that you don't have to sort through YouTube and everything. And this is what it's looking like right now. But I think the Albright, do you see the Albright on there? It's
this
really
is great.
small.
Yeah, 'cause you got the line you used. Yeah, you got all.
Okay, so
all
we haven't done the Albright. Well, it's not in this thing yet, but it will be. But in my experience, the Albright and the Alberto knot are both in the 93 to 96% knot. So really good, but not as good as the double uni and the FG, in my opinion, for braid to monofilament. I mean, braid to fluorocarbon or braid to monofilament. So
have you seen any difference? Like, does it matter fluorocarbon or mono? I think a fluorocarbon mono are very similar. Like,
there's some differences, and then when you go to some of these knots, there's differences even in the manufacture of the line and what even within the manufacturer. Say you find some a manufacturer that you really like and you really trust. Like for me, that's Daiwa. I use Daiwa J Fluoro all the time, but they have several different types of J Fluoro. They have some that are what they call 16 carrier and 8 carrier, and so they'll have like smoother lines, and then they'll have what are like rougher lines. And so with like a knot like the FG knot, a super slick, real smooth one does not. It is more likely to slip. I mean, imagine that you have a surface that's super slick, and you try to put something on it. And then you imagine you have a real matte surface and you try to put something on it. One of them is going to slide off and one of them is going to hold there. Well, you can find that, I may really like the way that this other line casts, but my FG knot is stronger with the other line. So I'll use the rougher line if I have my choice, right? But, a double uni knot is pretty much that's the go-to, but there are situations where that's not ideal. In other words, like where if you're going to be casting that line in and out of the guides all day long, an FG knot is going to be way smoother and way cleaner than the double uni knot. So that's why you really need to learn a lot of different knots, is because there are different applications. Maybe you're in a situation to where there's some kind of weird algae on the surface or whatever, and you're if you have a knot that has a right angle tag end to it, like a perfection loop or something like that, it's just catching this stuff all the time. And then you could have another knot that has a tag end that's parallel to the line, the standing line, and it doesn't catch anything. And you'll just find that, okay, for this application, that knot is not the best one for me. So if you're asking, like, what have I changed my mind on? It changes all the time, because as lines change and as the finish on fluorocarbon changes and the finish on braid changes, there may be a knot that I really, really liked and I was using a ton, but for whatever reason, that now slips with this certain manufacturer. Or you need to turn, like I will do like 5 turns on a clinch knot or on a double uni or whatever. And maybe this line, new and improved line for this year, is a little slicker, and now maybe I have to put 7 turns in there in order for it to not slip and to get the same testing. So I'm constantly testing and retesting as the new lines come out and deciding if what I was doing is still applicable and still the right knot and the right number of turns and the right application for this new fluorocarbon and the new braid. And, you know, I kind of stick to Daiwa, but it would be.
Well, you'd go crazy if you looked at all the.
You could. You would.
Right?
You would go crazy, and it could be a full-time job to test to tie all these knots. What you would need to do is like start with one and tie it with every manufacturer. I'm not going to do that because I kind of feel like I'm just gonna do it with what I use so that I know what I'm using. And then I have 100% confidence in that. But it makes such a difference because like I just go back to all the time that in fishing, like if you're trying to get good at fishing, there are so many things that we cannot control. We can't control the weather. We can't control the water clarity. We can't control whether the fish bite or sometimes if they're even there. We can't control a cold front. But then, you know, all of those things are uncontrollable things. But then there are things that you can control, and that's your tackle and your knots, the type of line that you choose to buy, the type of line that you choose to use, the strength of that line. Those things are controllable. And so when you go out there and you're hoping that you're going to have the greatest day ever, or you've put all this research and time into where you're going to go, and you've bought all the right tackle and you've bought all this, and then you choose a knot that is a 50% knot, and you just thought this is a great knot because I saw it on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, but no one ever tested it. And you lose the one fish, you get one bite that day and you lose it. Or even worse, you take your kid fishing and your kid loses the fish, right?
Yeah.
Now, most people, or there's a lot of people that a 50% knot would work fine because they don't understand the mechanics of the fishing rod well enough to actually put 100% pressure on the fish, right? So there's either too much bend in the rod, they don't know how to palm the drag. You see this a lot with people that haven't fished in salt water for the first time, and so the first half a day is to teach them how to put more than 2 pounds of pressure on the fish, and they're pulling as hard as they can, but it's not translating to as hard as they can at the fish, right? And so once, you know, but when you're you know, going for world records and you're you know, dealing with somebody that understands how the pressure on a fishing rod works and to put maximum pressure, and you're trying to catch a really large fish on really light tackle, the knots are it's the most important. The knot and the hook, because the hook can be the weak link in the system too.
Yeah, and in fact, I always, especially when I'm fly fishing, I keep in my pocket a hook sharpener. Mm-hmm. It's probably more of a mental thing than an advantage, but I like to have sharp hooks. So when I do get that one bite, I can set the hook.
Absolutely.
It gives me confidence in my head.
Yeah,
you know?
For sure. But it'll give you the same confidence to know that, you know, you've tied this leader or your connection, you know, to your braid or to your fly line is 100%. It's as strong as it's going to get. So, you know, from there, you know, you've controlled the things that you can control, and they are as strong as you can possibly tie them. And then maybe you get a bite, maybe you don't. I don't know.
But another thing, like if I'm fishing dock lights, sometimes you don't want 100%, right? Like when I fish dock lights, like that thing's, I'm not going to get that dock to get that thing. Like I want it to break off.
That's exactly right. And so there are knots like that too, where you can purposefully choose a weaker knot, and you can purposefully choose a weaker knot in a certain place. Like, so you may have fly fishing, you might go from your fly line to your leader, and you know that knot, you wouldn't want that to be the weakest knot in the whole thing, because if you break something off, you're losing the fly and the whole leader, right? Like that wouldn't make any sense. So you want that knot strong. You want your tapers down, and then you want like the fly. So imagine that you're casting to the bushes. You want the knot at the fly. If you're going to have anything fail, it's going to be right there. So you just lose the fly, you maintain your whole leader and everything like that. And you can choose those knots like a Homer Road loop. That's a 50% knot, right? So if you got 20-pound test, that's going to break at about 10, right? And but you could tie another knot you could slightly change that Homer Road loop, and the next knot's going to be, you know, 80%. And so when you pull that against a mangrove, you might break your leader way up, and now you got to tie a whole new leader to
Yeah.
get back in the water, right?
Yeah.
So fishing guides have learned this really quick, because if you're taking people that don't fish a lot and they throw it in the bushes a lot, you just want them to lose the least amount of stuff that's possible, right? And then, if it breaks at the braid to fluorocarbon connection on a spinning rod, now you got to tie that and then tie everything, everything else. So there are times where you would want a weaker knot, like you're saying.
Yes, specific question, because I just did this last week. I always say, when you're doing a fly line to the leader, do you do a nail knot? What do you do?
Well, that's another place where there are choices, right? So most fly lines these days come with a welded loop, right? So they call it a welded loop. It's already turned over, and then the plastic of the fly line is over the top of it. It's pretty strong. It really is. It's pretty strong. I've tested those too, and they do tend to test almost as strong as the fly line. But what's going to happen there is you're going to have to go for the loop-to-loop connection. So the next loop that you're going to tie in the fluorocarbon or monofilament leader is either going to be like a perfection loop or a double surgeon's loop or something, and that knot presents a problem because it has a tag end that either is at a right angle, which does not go through. If it's 50 or 60 pound monofilament or fluorocarbon in your butt section, that short little 1 millimeter tag end gets caught on all the guides coming in. So if you're having to bring that in and you're trying to land fish after fish, with that, or you're reeling in to go to a new spot, now every time you have to get that out. So if that becomes the chief concern, like I want a smooth connection going in and out for whatever reason, I'm going to be moving a lot of different spots and I just want to be able to pull it out. You can cut that welded loop off and go with a nail knot, and then you can even put some glue over the top of it. They have like Zap-A-Gap or these gap filling glues that will like form a little bubble over it, so you can actually create the smoothest connection. Right. Yes, like a smooth, super smooth connection there, and that's where it goes back to, well, okay, now am I going to do that with tarpon fishing? Probably not. I'm going to maybe cut off the welded loop, and then I'm going to double the loop over myself, and I'm going to tie three nail knots on that, because I know from my testing that will be a stronger connection than the manufactured loop. Or I just look at that and I go, am I going to trust my entire day or week or everything to this? I don't know. I mean, there's probably a fly line manufacturer out there that would challenge me and say, yeah, it's stronger than the line. That connection's stronger than the line. I believe that it might be, but I know that I've never had one fail when I do it myself with three blood knot or three nail knots. Yeah,
but you're still doing a loop to loop connection.
I like it. I think a loop to loop is definitely the strongest. But like I say, is if you are fishing a really long leader and every time that you're landing a fish, you're having to bring that leader all the way to the reel. Like say you're using a 20-foot leader, you've got a 9-foot fly rod, and you're going to get it close to the boat. The leader's going to be all the way in the rod. So if that becomes a real problem to get it back out of the rod, then I'm going to choose a different knot.
I was always under, I guess, the mindset, which I've never tested, but I guess I've believed it, like that a loop-to-loop could act as like a hinge, and there may be more flexibility in the leader, and it may interrupt your accuracy.
There could be that. If you watch it in slow motion, which you can easily do, like record a fly cast in slow motion these days, I don't see that it's hinging much. I think that the more important thing is to match the diameter of the fly line and the diameter of the butt section of your leader should be similar. But then you can also have very stiff fluorocarbon or monofilament in relation to the fly line. So when I'm going to choose my butt section material, it's going to be of about the same diameter as the fly line and about the same stiffness of the fly line, so that when that does unroll, that's where I think you're going to get the real hinge effect. Is like if you were using a super stiff, like Mason hard monofilament on a fly line that's very flexible, and it goes out there, and then all of a sudden you hit this stiff part, you're going to have the leader kind of kick up. But honestly, most people are lucky to even get the leader to unroll. But if you do it right and you tie the leader in a way that it can enhance your ability to make the thing unroll, where you can take a fly caster that's really, really great, and he's going to make any leader unroll, right? So, of course, that person is super detail oriented because he already knows, like, well, I'm a really good caster, but I also want to put every advantage in my favor, right? So I'm going to use the right butt section. I'm going to use the right leader. I'm going to do that. Where you have these other people that are super worried about which butt section they use, but they literally can't cast 40 feet and they can't unroll it no matter what the leader is, right? So there's a fine line there to where you want to be a good enough caster to get it done, and then put as many things in your advantage as possible, right? So that it makes it easier to unroll the leader like you want.
Yeah, I gotcha. Good point. Because I should go back of the loop to loop, because I have one 9-weight reel. So like if I'm using, I have to, before I go fishing night before, I put a leader on. But maybe I want to go with a 10-pound test, or I don't want a thick leader on it. I don't want a shock.
Yeah.
So I'm always messing with my leader. But if I loop to loop, I could just I'll unloop this one and put a new one on.
You definitely can do that. Yes, for sure. And that makes a big difference. Like if you were going to go from fishing for bonefish and you thought, well, maybe I might see some barracudas out there or something like that, you could have a loop to loop to where you could loop on a little butt section that has wire on it and a whole fly, right? Like that's how we used to do it with tarpon. Like we would have we used to have the tarpon stretcher cases, where you have to, this is before fluorocarbon came out, but we would use monofilament, and you would have to keep it under tension to keep it perfectly straight. And you would have to stretch it or heat it up with water to get it perfectly straight. And so that we would have these cases where the fly was already on there. Then you would have the shock tippet, and then it would be held by elastic band to keep it a little bit under tension. Then we would have the class tippet all rolled up. And so when we wanted to change a fly, we would just go loop to loop to that, and the old fly would go in the stretcher case, and you would and so a fly wasn't just a fly in your fly box. It was this fly in the stretcher case, and we'd have like 24 of those rigged and ready to go, and it was really fast and quick. But if you wanted to just change the fly, it was.
So I still do that. I
do?
have a stretcher box. Yeah. Should I not? Like I feel like if I don't, the leader won't be straight.
No. Well, you can, but that's one of the big advantages of some of the new materials that have come out. Like some of the new fluorocarbon, you can just stretch between your knees right there on the boat. And honestly, like I've gotten away from all stretcher cases. I don't use them anymore at all because I'm now using fluorocarbon that I can easily stretch out, and as the fish have become harder and harder to get to bite, I'm using lighter and lighter fluorocarbon, so I can easily stretch that on the boat. And if I'm not after a world record or in a tournament, or you're just out there fishing, what does it really matter if your leader is 15 inches or 14 inches or 11 inches or whatever?
I just want to catch the fish.
Right, you're just trying to catch the fish. So if you have a 15-inch leader, like back in the leader stretcher days, everything was IGFA. And in the tournaments, of course, if you're fishing in a tournament, you got to be within the rules. And if they're saying it has to be a 12-inch leader, and it could be shorter than 12 inches but not longer than 12 inches, then you have to respect that. But if you're just out there fishing, I tie a leader that's long enough that I can cut the fly off and tie a new knot a couple of times, right, before I have to tie a new shock tippet on, right, because that's going to really start to slow you down. So now if I can just cut the fly off and tie a new fly on, I can do that really quick with 40-pound fluorocarbon or 50-pound fluorocarbon, which is pretty much what we're using these days. Instead of when I first started guiding, people were using regularly 100-pound Mason, hard mono, for tarpon. That stuff is like the size of one of the cables attached to my computer here. Like it's like massive stuff and super hard to deal with. So that's the kind of thing that you would want to tie back on the bench with the, where you could, somehow pull it with pliers and, the whole deal to get that knot to seat properly. And those days are all over with the nice fluorocarbon that we have now. And you don't even have to have gloves on. You just pull it tight.
That's good to know. I'm learning every day, Tom.
Yeah,
This is good. I don't need to save room on my boat. I have a stretcher box.
The stretcher boxes are great, and they can be really super fast, but they also take a tremendous amount of time to
make,
rig 24 flies like that. And then what would happen to me all the time is I would get out there and there'd be a hot fly, but I'd only have one of them in the leader stretcher box. So I had 23 other flies that I had that they weren't eating. And then it's like, okay, we're having a knot tying party here for a few minutes while I get 3 or 4 more flies set up. So I don't know. I think these days, longer. Not afraid to use a longer shock tippet, and I'm not fishing any tournaments and not trying to set any records on the tarpon, and just want to get the bite.
Yeah. But that's all part of it, right? Like I try to, what was it? I think Mark Sosin said like half your fish are caught the night before, right? Like have them all ready, but then stuff happens and you got cut off or you got broken off, and then the fish in nearby, so you time real fast. What can you tie fast and comfortably? That's
exactly right. That's why you need a lot of knots, because there are knots that you tie at home to get ready, which is absolutely the optimum knot. An FG knot is a perfect example of that. And then there are knots when your hands are wet and you're trying to seat it down properly and it's not getting seated. But there's another knot that you can tie that's really strong, but it's not perfect. So when you show up at the boat in the morning, your stuff's perfect. But then throughout the day, you're going to do the best you can based upon the conditions and how much time you have. And I mean, there's situations where you got fish all around you, and if you stop to tie an FG knot, they're all gone. Where you might just tie directly to the braid, right? Like, I mean, this is the only chance we got. What's going on there?
Sorry, that's my dog barking. I think the mailman's come by.
That's all right. Well, we're approaching the end, Mike. You got any other questions about knots?
No, I guess that's good. But that's kind of, I used to tie a bimini twist, but I would never tie it in the boat. Like at the night before, tie a bimini and all that, but you're on the boat and like, I don't have time for a bimini twist. Just go,
Yeah.
I'm missing on that time, but no, I just look forward to seeing your spreadsheet there. That list of
we're going to put it together. If you want one, and anybody listening to this wants to have that, it's going to be very available soon. But if you want to make sure that you get yours, text 305-930-7346 or send me an email at podcast@saltwaterexperience.com, and I'll save you one and make sure that you get on that list for sending those out when I have them. But I'll make sure you get one too, Mike. You were inspirational and influential in my scientific method when you told me that I shouldn't just test it once. So all these knots have been tested 3 times, like you suggested. So you test them 3 times, you break all 3 of them, and then you take an average. That's what we've been doing. So it makes a difference. It really does make a difference, because out of those 3 knots, one of the things that makes a really big difference is that you realize that not every knot that you tie is good.
The same.
Right? Like they look the same, but you break 3 of them. One of them breaks at 10 and the other 2 break at 15. You're like, okay, well, I obviously tied this one wrong, or something's not right, or it's not working right. So, but the other 2 are consistent. And usually if that happens, I'll tie a 4th one and throw that in there and just see. And so you have one that breaks at 15, one breaks at 15.2, one that breaks at 10. It's like, well, let's tie another one. And then that 3rd one breaks at 15.3, right? So, okay, now I'm going to call it.
You had an issue with that 10-pound.
Right.
Yeah.
Something happened.
Yeah.
Something happened with that one. But anyway, all right, Mike. Well, thanks for being on the show today. I appreciate it, and giving us all this information about bonefish. When you're finished with this new study, I'd love to have you on and find out what it takes to change regulations, what kind of science we need to change regulations, and how that whole process goes. Sounds like a riveting podcast, but it would be interesting.
That's a very frustrating one too.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right, man. I hope the wind stops blowing for you. You can get out there. As for everybody else, if you want that knot guide, text me 305-930-7346, podcast@saltwaterexperience.com. That's the email address, and you can get one of those knot guides for yourself. As far as the guests, next week we'll have another awesome guest just like Mike. Thanks again, Mike, and we will talk to you later. See ya.